It's good against Reclamation, maybe, but it's definitely good against Ban. That's what we hope to play against. So we'll see if that holds up in practice. We have Andrew Sullano on that Orzhov Yorion deck against Luis Samuel Deltour, who's finished last week in the Players Tour with Bant Ramp. I think inspired a lot of other people to pick it up. He has had a lot of influence on this standard metagame here.
Yeah, absolutely. I know he wasn't too happy with his mana base, but otherwise was very happy with his spell configuration.
That is one of the funniest kind of subplots of this whole standard format to me, where Deltour forgot, I believe, to put Hallowed Phantoms back in his deck after he was tinkering with his mana base. Made the top 8 of the tournament anyway, just classically top 8ing a Players Tour with an inferior mana base. And then everyone else picked up their list, copied and pasted it into their arena account, and thought it was good to go, and realized very quickly that they couldn't cast Shadow the Sky or Elspeth Conquers Death quite as much as they would want
to. All right, well, we see Sullano kind of getting out ahead on the battlefield pretty quickly using a Charming Prince to scry, while Deltour is just seeming to lean a little bit harder on his reactive spells.
Yeah, a slow start from both players. These aren't fast decks. These aren't racing out of the gates. But this is the kind of interaction you expect to see in the early turns. Dovin's Veto being used to take care of a card which could cause problems for him in the long term. Now, that Veto, there aren't that many effects like that in the deck. And that's a valuable commodity against a deck that relies on Elspeth Conquers Death that you see in Sullano's hand on a lot of these non-creature effects to blink with your Yorions. So using that there is a statement of how important he thinks it is in that spot.
Right, just having that extra permanent on the battlefield that also generates so many resources on its own is just the bread and butter of how these Doom Foretold decks want to operate, and being able to make sure that Yorion won't get to blink it later in a game that Luis Samuel Deltour is just assuming is going to go long is incredibly valuable to him.
Yeah, and a fun interaction there from Deltour using one Charming Prince to bring the other Charming Prince, which sends the other one to exile to come back on the following end step. So you can bob and weave around sweepers that way, because one of them is always in exile, ready to come back later on. And that's also the loop that we might see Sullano try to set up with Yorion Sky Nomad, where Yorion can blink Charming Prince, the Prince comes back in and blinks Yorion, and you can loop those on each turn cycle. And if there's any other permanent to blink with the Yorion trigger that you're now recurring over and over again, the game gets out of control so quickly.
Right, and we see Andrew Sullano here looking to bottom an Elspeth Sun's Nemesis and tanking on if Agonizing Remorse is what he wants to spend his next draw step on.
What would be your inclination here if you were Sullano?
Ultimately, I'm pretty interested in having it, since worst case scenario, you just exile the Uro out of the graveyard, but best case, you take a powerful card out of Deltour's hand.
Yeah, trading with the best card in Deltour's hand in this spot and just getting that information is really valuable too.
And on top of all of that, it just creates a nice situation to put this Yorion from Sullano's companion zone into his hand.
Yeah, it's a nice way to use all of your mana most efficiently here.
Right, there's nothing really that you want to Elspeth Conqueror's Death. The Yorion still in hand is a little lackluster. This is just a way to actually get to do something productive with the turn.
Yeah, and we see Agonizing Remorse takes the Mystical Dispute, and it's worth noting that even though this is an Orzhov deck, Yorion, because of the hybrid mana cost, is a blue card. So that Mystical Dispute is a 1 mana leak for specifically Yorion. And
we see Luis Samuel flooding out just a little bit here.
And this is something that these band decks are kind of prone to in my experience, where you have to run 28, 29 land because you need to make all of your first few land drops. But you don't have that many ways to recoup those cards. And a lot of your other things like Domin's Veto or Mystical Dispute are these 1-for-1 trades. So once 2 of your cards cancel out with 2 of your opponent's cards, you're left with a handful of lands and they might still have action left over.
Right, and ultimately I kind of like the position that Deltour has been able to create here, where Sullano doesn't have any way to get any sort of advantage off of these Yorions.
Yeah, and drawing that third Yorion there, Sullano is happy to just start running those out, and I mean, if Deltour has drawn a Mystical Dispute in the meantime, that's just fine, he'll take that.
Right, this is a position where you don't want to jam your Elspeth Conqueror's Death into a reactive spell like that aforementioned Mystical Dispute. You want to actually try and create... You want these Yorions to trade for something rather than just legend ruling themselves.
Yeah, that Elspeth Conqueror's Death is the moneymaker here. That's a card you want to stick and hopefully blink with a future Yorion too. So we'll see Sullano try and position himself to resolve that and hopefully tag something big with it when it comes in. And this Shadow the Sky is looking a little awkward here for Deltour, who, he can fire it off to deal with the first of 3 Yorions, but it gives Sullano back a card in the process. And, you can't keep making those exchanges without falling behind.
Right. More than likely, this is creating a situation where Sullano is going to get to resolve this Elspeth Conqueror's
Oh, and
death.
this is perfect. And the defenses are down. Sullano doesn't even have to worry about anything here.
Oh, and it looks like Solano's not sure if he wants to cast Mortify and a Treacherous Blessing after seeing Dovin's veto prioritized on Blessing earlier, or go ahead and stick this Elspeth Conqueror's death.
And Sullano knows that this Uro is such tempting bait for that Elspeth Conqueror's death that Deltour might be setting up a line where he can tag Sullano's lobby with his own, and usually having the second Elspeth Conqueror's death is the best place to be. So definitely worth pausing for Thor here, and he does go, in fact, for that Treacherous Blessing, and I imagine we'll follow up with Modify on the Euro.
Right, and this is a situation where, like you said, Sullano is just trying to respect a possible Elspeth Conqueror's death out of Deltour.
And a big Hydro Crisis coming down, which very conveniently does get around Elspeth Conqueror's death. That card is surprisingly hard to remove for Sullano.
Yeah, Sullano's certainly getting a little bit punished here for using Mortify on something that could have been Elspeth Conqueror's death.
An Oath of Kaya can deal 3 points to Teferi and pick that off. But that 6/6 flyer is a very real threat in this game. And if Sullano can't find an answer to it in the next 2 or 3 turns, then that could just end the game by itself, regardless of how many cards Sullano can draw in the meantime.
Right, and this is a situation where this Treacherous Blessing, the damage from it is going to start adding up quickly when you're facing down a 6/6 flyer.
Charming Prince can exile the Fenlurker if he likes, get another Fenlurker trigger, eat a second card.
And this is a turn that Sullano can invest in these grindy sorts of plays rather than actually just trying to gain a bunch of life or scry or anything to that effect. We just see Sullano kind of saying, all right, my plan is to grind Deltour to dust. Plan's good. We're sticking to the plan.
Yeah, the ideal follow-up for Sullano would be something like a Doom Foretold that would eat the Crisis while also posing a serious threat in its own right. Or Glass Casket will do the job too.
Glass Casket does deal with this Hydroid Crisis. Sullano is, again, really, really needs to recover the amount of life that he's paid for this copy of Treacherous Blessing.
Yeah, you look at the deck and you think, well, it's only 1 point at a time, and you have so many cards that can get some of that life back. But it does add up, and especially if you have a large 6/6 flyer applying pressure, then you do need to be cognizant of that. The nice thing about Glass Casket is there's no line where Deltour can pivot into this tempo game by like bouncing the casket to get the Crisis back. Because
but the trigger can go on the stack. Deltour may be able to just bounce this Glass Casket with the trigger on the stack, and then the Crisis won't get exiled at all.
Yeah, that does work, and typically that line is ineffective if they're able to recast it, but that's not a guarantee. Yeah, we see the Ferry Row coming into the picture to bounce that Glass Casket back.
And now we just see Sullano able to recast the casket.
He can, although there is a 3/1 flyer that will be making an appearance at the end of turn here.
That's true. Having to recast spells like that is not free.
And know that Sullano is now on 6, so that is 2 hits potentially from the Brazen Burrow if nothing else changes. Oh, well, this is...
This is a lot of resources.
How would you like to stack your triggers, Mr. Sullano?
All of them. Thank you very much.
Yes, is the answer. And I think we're going to see that Charming Prince Yorion loop in action, potentially.
It's possible. It is going to take another turn in that extra Yorion for Sullano to likely take that kind of risk, because as it stands, Yorion is going to have to get into the blocker's zone here.
Yeah, he might think it's better to pad his life at all now, leave that 4/5 flyer back as a blocker. Maybe gain some life with the Charming Prince.
Mm-hmm.
Because now with this hand, I think he feels solidly in command of the game. He just needs to live long enough to unload that hand, and this is the best way to guarantee that.
It's all a matter of just his life total at this point.
I believe the source, according to Kai Bure on Twitter, the source for this Yorion deck was Jan Moritz Merkel, who was one of these Magic child prodigies from back in the day, winning a Pro Tour when he was either 16 or 18, and still 15 years later, almost making his mark on the current standard format.
And it looks like that it is still coming pretty close to making a mark big enough to take this first game over Sullano. This is close.
Yeah, and you see in Sullano's hand 2 copies of Elspeth Conquers Death and a Yorion, but there's no guarantee he'll have the time to unload all of that, especially with Treacherous Blessing really living up to at least the first half of his name here.
Well, okay, so Yorion being able to blink this casket is a really big deal against this Krasis Uro combo here. Because
Krasis comes back as a 0/0, immediately dies and goes to the graveyard, so you can now blink that and have the casket actually eat its intended target in the Euro or in the Brazen Borrower.
And with Sullano going to 1 here, this really is a situation where they are living on the margins.
Yeah, these are the kind of razor-tight games that you love watching. This is great Magic.
Ooh, are we going to see that blink with Charming Prince?
A giant stack of triggers slowly resolving. More cards entering Sullano's hand, lots of cards moving from zone to zone. There's so much going on here that's hard to keep track of. And yeah, I believe that's the 13th land that Deltour found in this game, and that's honestly not an uncommon occurrence for this band deck.
No, Deltour losing that first game, and so, it feels like so many things broke Deltour's way for Deltour to just come up a little bit short.
Yeah, and you see maybe why the Orzhov Yorion pilots felt that this was such a good matchup for them. This was what they wanted to play against, and when they learned that Bant was actually the most popular deck in the Players Tour, surpassing Team of Reclamation, that was great news for them. This is what they were shooting for.
Right, and we see over on the Orzhov side, not a ton being done in terms of sideboarding. Couple duresses here, couple cards out there, and it's because all of these exchanges frequently just put the Orzhov deck up a card here, up a card there, and so on. And against a deck wanting to use Hybrid Krasis, getting willed down like that ends up costing pretty huge over the course of a long game.
And Sullano, again, encountering this issue that we highlighted in Corey's match of how do you sideboard effectively with an 80-card deck? It's so much harder to map out your sideboard plans perfectly when there are 20 more cards, some of which are quite conditional to account for there.
Right, and a lot of things here just that are being cut are things in the vein of removal or cards that are a bit lower impact in the mid to late game, because you reach a point where your early game cards, they're fine. They're just going to fill out your curve. These are your Burglar Rats, your Yorick's Fin Lurkers, etc. But you need things a little bit more impactful than Elspeth Sun's Nemesis when you're facing down Hydroid Krasis, Uro, Elspeth Conquers Death, and so on.
Are you ever meant to cut Burglar Rat, or does that have diplomatic immunity?
Well, I wouldn't call it diplomatic immunity, but...
Yeah, I don't know if Burglar Rat is really a dignitary of any kind.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't exactly... I wouldn't vote for Burglar Rat, for better or for worse.
And we see what looks like just a perfectly solid hand here for Sullano. Deltour has lands into Uro with Teferi building into Krasis. So I think both players are going to be decently happy with what they have here.
Right, Deltour is really looking for an untapped land.
Yes. And Fable Passage doesn't really fit the bill. So he'll be having to think about how to sequence these spells to, develop his board while also not falling behind too much or stunning his mana in the process, Yarok's Funlocker will eat. I'll be curious to see what this chooses. Because he needs to keep all of his lands. I guess Teferi is not doing too much here, and this deck is designed so that all of your permanents generate some advantage when they enter the battlefield, so that you can blink them with Yorion. And Teferi is not really good against that setup.
Correct.
If anything, I think its utility in this matchup comes more from bouncing your own cards like Elspeth Conquers Death, just to reset those, or more so than setting your opponent behind on tempo.
Right, and we see Sullano resolve this copy of Treacherous Blessing in a way that is just so fast, and we know it's so important because of how far ahead it puts Sullano on cards in a grindy matchup.
Funlocker comes in for 1, as always. Keeps a card on top of the Temple of Silence. And there's not much you can do here to develop any further. His hand is full of reactive cards, which, if Deltour is trying to get on the board himself, will prove useful.
Right, and Deltour just sort of took a turn off there in order to get an extra counter on this Krasis and have that represent an additional card being drawn. Deltour is not really under any pressure, so taking things slowly is just fine.
But Sullano does have the Glass Casket to eat this and maybe a future Hydro Krasis.
Right. This is certainly a position where it feels like Sullano has most of the resources, and that's just on the back of this Treacherous Blessing giving him so many cards.
And it's nice that after passing with these reactive cards, not given an opportunity to use them the way he wants, Sullano can just spend that mana cycling a Triome and cashing that in for a new card.
Right, this is a position where Sullano is just kind of going through the motions at this point of trying to whittle down Deltour's resources. A hand disruption spell here, a removal spell there. Just doing exactly what the deck is designed to do against this Bant deck.
And Elspeth, I imagine, will be conquering Death quite a few times over the course of the next few turns. Death can't keep it down so easily.
Right, with Deltour just finding a couple of more lands off the top, it's hard to imagine anything else happening. And we see Sullano mousing over this Yorion. That's a little more underwhelming than it was a moment ago, now that there's not a Treacherous Blessing on the battlefield.
Absolutely. And yeah, this Bant deck, in theory, should be able to outgrind or outcard anything that comes up against it. But we see Sullano with a bigger board, more cards in hand, and the threat of more cards in hand thanks to not just the Yorion in his hand, but also the free Yorion that's hanging out in his companion zone.
Right, this Yorion Orsov deck is really just saying, okay, fine, let's spend all of our time grinding.
A third, your copy of Yorion enters the fray here too.
We're about to see the most painful Castle Lock Twain ever.
Oh, that was a quick mystical dispute. Wow.
Well, it's a spot where Sullano is 1 mana away from just being able to cast 5 drops through Mystical Dispute. Sullano needs to Deltour needs to cash those in order to make this Uro happen.
Oh, I completely agree. I'm just admiring Deltour's speed on the buzzer. His APM is truly impressive. And I imagine GS will take the Elspeth Conquest Death just so you don't have to worry about that as a reactive card. On the other hand, you do have the D-Spark, which currently is not being used for anything else. And if you're willing to work through the first chapter of Elspeth Conquest Death, taking out one of your cards, then maybe that's a better setup.
Right. The biggest issue at this point is that Sullano wants to make sure that they can go ahead and use Glass Casket to take out this Uro as soon as it comes down. And then committing that Yorion this turn kind of removes that guarantee.
And Sullano punished a bit for leaving in one D-Spark target in Deltour's hand, a second one in Nissa Who Shakes the World, jumping off the top here.
Luckily, this is a position where Elspeth Conquers Death isn't going to have a ton of effect, But this is certainly a spot where you have to wonder if Sullano maybe wanted to attack the haymakers a little bit more.
Would you say you're nostalgic for the days when Nissa was by far the best card in Standard?
Nostalgic. So it is grammatically correct. But I would not say it is an apt descriptor for my own feelings.
You do have memories of it, yes.
There are memories, and they are mine, and they involved Nissa who shakes the world.
There are memories of Nissa that we have not successfully repressed just yet. But it's weird to say that Nissa has almost found a fair place in this format, but you see it sometimes in these Bant ramp, Sultai ramp strategies, but it's not the automatic 4-of flagship that deciding matches and games that it was only a few short months ago.
And I really, really like Deltour holding this copy of Hallowed Fountain in hand when he knows that a Yorion is coming from Sullano's side, because this gives a card to exile to Yarok's Finlurker in the future.
I do like that. And also, Deltour is just not used to putting Hallowed Fountain on the battlefield. So, you know, I don't think he's accustomed to doing that.
It's a complicated situation, to be sure.
And so that follow-up Yorion, if Sullano wants to cast it, can nab the Teferi from his hand, use the Glass Casket to eat the 3/3 breeding pool, and then we're essentially back to where we were before, except that now there's a Yorion facing off against an Elspeth Conquers Death that, if it can build towards that third chapter, maybe he can get something going. But right now, there's not really anything that good to return.
Right. This was much closer than it was a moment ago, because now you can see Teferi bounce that Glass Casket and then recur the Uro from the graveyard, since it puts itself there when it comes back with the casket, which gives Deltour a couple of cards. There's a lot of things to like about what's going on Deltour's side.
A big draw there for Deltour. The second copy of Elspeth Conquers Death.
I mean, that basically puts it as Breeding Pool versus Yarok's Finlurker is the fight now.
And worth noting, Sullano can exactly activate Castle Lockthwain, and this is the kind of spot where that could come up. However, his life total is under a little bit of pressure here.
Yeah, this is certainly a position where Sullano needs to be able to make something happen.
Quick graveyard check there. Oath of Kaya will shoot down that breeding pool, stop it from causing any further mischief. Yeah, and instead of using Charming Prince to scry, Sullano is content to just hold that, hoping for a better future target, and then to just activate the castle again on Deltour's end step.
And look at what Deltour just did. He put a loyalty counter on Hydroid Krasis so it would die, and then chose to, in order to be able to escape with this copy of Uro.
And those are the kinds of interactions which are really not immediately intuitive. And for someone who has been playing this deck as long as Deltour has, that's probably second nature to him at this point.
Right, and actually having that option on Elspeth Conquers Death just gives it an additional layer of selection, of purpose in those sorts of situations. Normally, you would think, all right, put a +1 counter on your creature, put a loyalty counter on your planeswalker, and so on, but just keeping a card in the graveyard on that effect that feels like it's non-optional can be a drawback whenever, you know, you'd rather have an Uro on the battlefield than a 1/1 Hydroid Krasis.
Yeah, and one of our players is having a connection issue, so we're just pausing while we hopefully can resolve that in the near future. But yeah, Deltour showing his mastery of this band deck, in case there was any doubt after his performances with it last week. And this, I think, shows the virtue of really taking the time to master your deck of choice. You know, there is something to be said for, you see this really interesting looking Orzhov Yorion deck, and you switch to it at the last minute, and you hope that this is a thing that takes people by surprise and wins you the tournament. And those are always the best victories, the ones where you just take everyone completely out of left field. On the other hand, these bad decks, Sultai decks, Team of Reclamation decks, if you know those in and out, that's probably going to be a better shot for you than going in cold with the new deck of the moment.
Exactly. We see Louis Samuel Deltour bringing that Bant deck. Then we also have PV playing Teamer Reclamation. But now both players back into the game. We're throwing it back now from the Orzhov Yorion side.
And it's nice that Sullano now is the one who does have cards in hand, so it's good to get a chance to see exactly what those are. It is nice, yes. And now Uro is on the battlefield. That Yorion did not resolve to blink the glass casket to take down this Uro, and so he will get to attack. And not that he needs more life at this point, but he'll take it. But also to draw a card, which unfortunately for Deltour is yet another land. And again, the flooding issues with this band deck coming into play here.
Right, without being able to have something like Hydroid Crisis to fix this problem, it really feels like it's harder to keep up in terms of cards when so many cards in your deck are just lands.
And Deltour is getting well and truly burgled here, as not that his hand had any cards or any valuables in it anyway, but we're putting it here just as a 1/1, just parking it there for future use. And also making sure that this Castle Lockthane activation is a little bit less painful.
Oh, how about a Kaya Orzhov Usurper off the top?
Yeah, that Uro was not too close to escaping, and now it has no hope of escaping whatsoever.
Oh no, to the underworld it goes, and to the underworld it will stay. And now this Kaya actually gives Sullano a way to turn the corner.
And another burglar rat joins this motley crew and empties his hand again for the cast activation.
It feels like Deltour needs to answer this Kaya as well as the creatures on the battlefield, or this game's just going to end on the spot.
Yeah, Deltour is at 21, so he has a few turns of reprieve, but not that many, honestly. And there are so many things going on here that I'm not sure what the best draw in Deltour's deck could be at this point. There's nothing like a planet cleansing. There's no reset effect like Ugin the Spirit Dragon in the next core set, which could undo all of Sullano's good work in this game. Instead, he's going to have to grind through all of this individually.
Right, and we're at a point where this Kaya, there are enough cards exiled for Deltour that this Kaya is just threatening lethal next turn. So instead, we see Louis using the card to actually pad his own life total.
And we're really seeing the strength of Castle Lockthane in these decks, where it's just priced into your mana base, and especially in Orzhov, you don't get these spots too often where it's this awkward come to play tap land. It's just a essentially free source of card advantage, which takes over these games very easily.
Right, and that's exactly what we see there, where we see Deltour drawing another land, going ahead and conceding, and that it really just felt like a commanding victory on the side of the Orzhov Yorion deck.
And we've seen that Yorion deck deal with a blistering fast aggro deck in the form of Mardu Knights, and now also one of the go big grindy decks of the format in Bant Ram, and it was able to kind of contend with